My name is Nora Whitfield. I'm 36. 8 months ago, I received a certified letter from a storage facility in Columbus, Ohio, informing me that I was the registered account holder for a 10 by 20 storage unit that had been continuously maintained and paid for since 2009, 16 years, and that the automatic payment method on file had recently failed, and that if I did not update the payment information within 30 days, the unit would be subject to the facility's standard abandonment and auction procedures. I had never been to this storage facility. I had never rented a storage unit in Columbus. I had not lived in Ohio since I was 19 years old. My name was on the account because my grandfather, Harold Whitfield, had put it there when he opened the account in 2009, 3 years before he died, and had been paying the monthly fee of $142 from a personal checking account that had been automatically debited every month for 13 years before his death, and then continued to be debited by standing instruction that nobody had apparently noticed or canceled for 3 additional years after he died, from an estate account that his son, my Uncle Gerald, had been managing as executor, and had, based on the evidence of 16 years of uninterrupted automatic payments, apparently not examined closely enough to notice that $142 was leaving it every single month for a storage unit that Gerald had no knowledge of and that nobody in the family, including me, had known existed. Before I tell you what was in that unit, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if this story is landing somewhere real. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to where this started. I need to tell you about my grandfather Harold before I tell you about the unit, because Harold is the reason the unit existed, and understanding Harold is essential to understanding why what was inside it was what it was, and why he had put my name on the account and not anyone else's, and why that decision, made quietly in 2009 without telling me or explaining it or leaving any note that I have ever found, turned out to be the most significant financial decision anyone has ever made on my behalf. Harold Whitfield was 81 years old when he died. He had been, for the 60 years preceding his death, a man of specific and pronounced habits. The kind of habits that accumulate across a long life into something that looks, from the outside, like eccentricity, but that understood from the inside, from the perspective of someone who actually knew him, was simply the external expression of a very particular set of values about privacy and independence, and the specific importance of maintaining control over your own affairs rather than delegating that control to other people, even people you loved and trusted. He had been a civil engineer for 35 years, retiring at 65 from a state highway department where he had spent his entire career managing infrastructure projects with the specific patient competence of someone who understands that large systems function through the accumulated reliability of small, correct decisions made consistently over long periods of time. He applied this same principle to his personal life. He kept records of everything. Not obsessively, not in a way that interfered with living, but with the specific, systematic attention of someone who believed that accurate documentation was a form of respect for the things you cared about, and that the absence of documentation was an invitation to misunderstanding. He was married for 47 years to my grandmother Ruth, who died 6 years before he did, of a cardiac event that was fast, and without significant warning, the specific kind of sudden loss that leaves the surviving partner disoriented in ways that are both practical and profound. Because so much of the daily architecture of a long marriage exists in the silent division of responsibilities that is never formally articulated and becomes visible only in its absence. Harold managed the grief by continuing to do the things he had always done, maintaining his records, attending to his affairs, living carefully and independently in the house he and Ruth had shared, declining the various offers from their children and grandchildren to move closer or to accept more assistance than he wanted or needed at any particular point. He had 2 children, my mother, Carol, who is 64 and lives in Portland, where I also live, and my uncle Gerald, who is 68 and lives in Columbus, which is why Gerald was the natural choice for executor when Harold died, being local, and being in the family's informal assessment, the more practically organized of the two children, the one who handled logistics and paperwork with the specific competence that made him the obvious person to manage an estate's administrative requirements. I want to tell you something about my relationship with Harold that matters to understanding why he put my name on the account and not someone else's. I was his only grandchild who had, from a young age, shown genuine interest in the things he cared about, meaning the specific technical and practical questions of how things were built and maintained and documented. My mother's other children, my two younger brothers, were warm and genuinely fond of Harold, but did not share his particular interests. Gerald's children, two daughters who were closer to Harold in geography than I was for most of my adult life, had cordial relationships with him that, as best I observed, never developed into the specific kind of mutual intellectual engagement that my own relationship with Harold had. I visited Harold several times a year throughout my 20s and early 30s, even after moving to Portland, making the trip to Columbus specifically because I wanted to see him rather than because family obligation required it. We talked about engineering, about infrastructure, about the specific history of the highway systems he had spent his career building, and the maintenance challenges those systems now faced. We talked about his records, which he kept in a system of organized file boxes in his study that I found deeply satisfying to examine because they were, in their meticulousness, a complete portrait of a careful life. He showed me things in those files that he did not show other people, specific documents and records, and the occasional letter that he wanted me to understand existed, not for any immediate practical reason, but because he valued, I think, having one person in the family who knew the full shape of the picture he had been building. He did not show me the storage unit account. He never mentioned the storage unit. Whatever was in that unit was something he had decided, at some point, to keep separate from the records he was willing to share directly, which tells me something important about the specific nature of what he chose to put there. I flew to Columbus 4 days after receiving the certified letter. I did not call Gerald before going, which I want to acknowledge was a deliberate decision rather than an oversight, based on a specific instinct I had, which I could not fully articulate at the time, but which has since become much clearer to me, that whatever Harold had put in that unit was something he had intentionally kept separate from the family's general knowledge, and that I should understand what it contained before deciding what to share with whom. The storage facility was on the eastern edge of Columbus, a large facility with climate-controlled units, the kind of facility that exists specifically for the long-term storage of things that matter enough to protect but that are not needed in daily life. The manager, a young woman named Kezia, was helpful and professional. She confirmed my identity against the account records, confirmed that I was indeed the listed account holder, and provided me with the access code and the unit number without any questions or complications, because the account had always been maintained in my name, and she had no reason to do anything other than treat me as the account holder I legally was. I walked to the unit. It was in an interior corridor of the climate-controlled building, which meant the temperature and humidity had been maintained continuously for 16 years. A fact I noted because it was relevant to the condition of whatever was inside. I punched in the code. I raised the roll-up door. The unit was not full. That is the first thing I want to tell you, because storage units in the context of a family drama often suggest accumulation, the physical weight of a lifetime, and that is not what I found. The unit contained, arranged with the specific, organized precision that I recognized immediately as Harold's, the following things. 6 archival file boxes, clearly labeled in Harold's handwriting, were stacked neatly against the left wall. A fireproof safe, the kind you can purchase at any office supply store, approximately 2 feet by 2 feet, sitting on a low wooden platform that Harold had apparently built specifically for this purpose. A single wooden chair, folded flat and leaning against the right wall, and a sealed envelope taped to the inside of the roll-up door at exactly eye level, with my name on it in Harold's handwriting. I sat in the folding chair, which I unfolded because there was nowhere else to sit, and I opened the envelope. There were 2 pages inside, handwritten on the specific lined paper Harold used for his personal correspondence, in the clear, precise handwriting of a man who had spent a career producing engineering documents that required legibility and accuracy. He wrote, "Nora, if you are reading this, it means the storage facility has contacted you, which I arranged by putting your name on the account. I want to explain why I did this and what is here before you open anything, so that you understand the context before you encounter the contents." He wrote that the file boxes contain records. Specifically, they contain financial records that I did not feel comfortable keeping at the house after Ruth died, because Gerald has a key to the house and has used it on several occasions to look through things I would have preferred remained private, and I decided the appropriate response was to move the most sensitive records to a location he did not know about. I want to be specific about what sensitive means in this context. The records document, in detail, the financial transactions of our family across approximately 40 years, including transactions that Gerald is aware of and transactions that Gerald is not aware of, and that I believe he should not have access to without your knowledge and your mother's knowledge, because they concern your mother as much as they concern Gerald, and it was not Gerald's place to be the sole person with access to that information. He wrote, "The safe contains two things. The combination is the year your grandmother and I were married, followed by the year the highway bridge project I am most proud of was completed, which you will know because I told you about it specifically and more than once. Inside the safe is a document portfolio and a smaller envelope. The document portfolio contains the original copies of certain financial instruments and property records that I have kept separate from the main estate records, specifically because I did not want them to be part of the estate administration that Gerald will conduct. The smaller envelope contains the instructions for what I want done with those instruments and records." He wrote, "I put your name on this account and not Gerald's and not your mother's for the following reasons. Gerald, I do not fully trust you with this information for reasons the records in the file boxes will make clear to you. Your mother, I trust completely, but she is not and has never been comfortable with the specific kind of careful examination of financial records that what I am asking you to do requires. You are, Nora. You have always been the person in this family who could look at a set of numbers and understand what they say without letting the emotional complexity of what they say prevent you from seeing it clearly. I am asking you to do that now. I am sorry it is in this form. I would have preferred to have this conversation with you directly. I did not manage to find the right moment while I was alive to have it, which is a failure I regret, but which I am trusting you to correct on my behalf. I read that letter 3 times before I opened any of the file boxes. I want to tell you what I felt as I read it, not because my feelings are the story, but because I think being honest about the emotional experience of this kind of discovery matters to understanding what it actually means when you find out that someone trusted you with something large. I felt, first, the specific weight of being trusted, not chosen in the sense of being preferred or favored, but trusted in the specific sense that Harold had used the word, trusted to look at something clearly without letting the emotional complexity prevent me from seeing it accurately. I have always taken that quality in myself seriously, the ability to examine difficult things without flinching, and Harold had seen it and had decided it was the right tool for whatever this situation required. And being seen that accurately by someone who has known you your whole life carries a specific gravity that is different from ordinary recognition. I felt, second, a specific and growing apprehension about what the file boxes would contain, because Harold's letter had been precise and careful people who create elaborate separate systems for sensitive records do not do so in response to minor or ambiguous concerns. I opened the first file box. The records were organized chronologically, which I expected, and they were labeled clearly, which I also expected, and what they contained, across 6 boxes spanning 40 years of carefully maintained financial documentation, was a picture of my family's financial history that was substantially different from the picture I had previously understood. I want to tell you what the records showed, because the specifics matter, and because Harold organized them specifically, so that the picture would be clear to someone willing to look at it carefully. The records showed that Harold had made financial contributions to Gerald across a period of 31 years, totaling, in Harold's own accounting, $412,000. These contributions were documented in detail, with dates and amounts and Harold's brief notations about the stated purpose of each contribution. Notations that ranged from business shortfall to property investment to personal emergency to no reason given, the last category appearing with increasing frequency in the later years of the record. Not one of these contributions had been repaid. Harold's records noted this explicitly, with a running total of the outstanding balance updated each time a new contribution was made and never adjusted downward by a repayment entry, because no repayment entry ever existed. The records also showed that Harold had made financial contributions to my mother across the same period, totaling $87,000, and that these contributions had been made under different circumstances, primarily in response to specific documented needs. My parents' divorce when I was 12 and the legal costs associated with it, a medical expense during my younger brother's childhood, illness, 2 contributions toward educational costs for my brothers. My mother had repaid $31,000 of the $87,000, with the repayments noted specifically in Harold's records. The outstanding balance on my mother's side, in Harold's accounting, was $56,000, a number Harold had noted beside the total with a specific annotation that I want to share because I think it matters. He had written, "Carol's balance is not a debt. It is a gift I have not yet formally designated. Gerald's balance is a debt he has not acknowledged." The distinction Harold drew between those two statements is the center of everything that came after. I sat in the storage unit for approximately 2 hours reading through the file boxes in chronological order. I did not rush. I read every entry and every notation, and I let the picture assemble itself, the way careful records assemble a picture when you read them in sequence without skipping, allowing the pattern to emerge from the accumulated detail rather than jumping to the summary and missing the texture that explains how the summary came to be. When I finished, I opened the safe. The combination Harold had described worked on the first try. Inside, as he had described, was a document portfolio and a smaller envelope. The document portfolio contained the originals of 3 specific financial instruments. A promissory note, signed by Gerald, for the amount of $225,000, representing what Harold's letter described as the portion of Gerald's total contributions that Harold had, at some point, formally documented as a loan rather than a gift, in response to a specific request from Gerald to formalize the arrangement for his own accounting purposes, and that Gerald had signed and then, based on the records, proceeded to not repay across the following 14 years until Harold's death. A deed to a small commercial property in a suburb of Columbus that Harold had purchased in 2003 and had, in 2011, transferred into a trust with my name as the trust's sole beneficiary, a transfer that had been properly recorded with the county and that I had never known about because Harold had done it without telling me, as the deed's recording date confirmed, and a brokerage account statement showing a separately held investment account that Harold had maintained outside the accounts that were part of his formal estate, with a value, as of the statement date, of $348,000, and my name designated as the account's transfer on death beneficiary, a designation that, like the trust deed and the storage unit account, would pass directly to me outside of the estate administration Gerald was conducting. The smaller envelope contained Harold's instructions, written in the same clear handwriting as the letter on the door. He had written, "Nora, the promissory note is yours to handle as you see fit. It is a legal document representing a debt Gerald owes to my estate, which means it is now an asset of my estate, which means it should have been disclosed to you and your mother as part of the estate administration. It was not, because Gerald is the executor and chose not to include it, which I anticipated, and which is the reason I kept the original here rather than in the house files. I want you to make a decision about what to do with it after you have read everything and had time to think carefully. The property and the investment account are yours directly, outside the estate, and require no action beyond your claiming them, which the account custodian and the county recorder will facilitate when you present the appropriate identification." He wrote, "I am leaving you these things because you are the right person to have them, and because I want you to be financially secure in a way that I was not able to ensure through the estate, given the complications I have described. I am leaving you the responsibility for the promissory note because I trust your judgment about what to do with it more than I trust anyone else's. What I hope you will do is share what you have found here with your mother, who deserves to know the full picture of her family's financial history, and then make a careful decision about the promissory note that reflects the values I believe you hold about fairness and accuracy, and the importance of things being what they actually are, rather than what it is convenient for them to appear to be. He wrote, I am sorry I did not say all of this to you directly. I should have. I was a man who was better at documentation than at the harder kind of conversation that documentation is sometimes a substitute for, and I recognize that as a limitation. I hope what I have left you is enough to correct the things that need correcting. I drove to my mother's house in Portland after flying home, which meant arriving unannounced on a Tuesday evening with a rental car full of 6 archival file boxes and a fireproof safe. My mother opened the door, looked at the boxes, and looked at me and said, Harold. I said, yes. She stepped back and let me carry everything in. We spent 3 evenings going through the records together. I want to tell you about those evenings because they were, in their particular quality of accumulated revelation, unlike any other 3 evenings I have ever spent in a room with another person. My mother is not, as Harold had correctly noted in his letter, a person comfortable with detailed financial examination. She is someone who manages her own affairs competently but without the specific appetite for financial documentation that Harold and I share. But she read every page I showed her, asked clarifying questions when something was unclear, and arrived, across those 3 evenings, at a complete understanding of the picture Harold had preserved across 40 years of careful records. She said, at the end of the 3rd evening, that she had known, in the vague and unspecific way that families know things without wanting to examine them too closely, that Gerald's relationship with their father's money had been something other than what it appeared. She said she had told herself, across the years, that her father managed the situation in the way he found appropriate and that it was not her place to press. She said Harold's records made clear that what had actually happened was not a father managing a situation in the way he found appropriate, but a son using a father's reluctance to create family conflict as an ongoing mechanism for extracting financial resources from that father across 3 decades without formal acknowledgement or repayment. She said, "What do you want to do about the promissory note?" I said, "I want to do what Harold asked me to do, which is what is fair and accurate. The note is an estate asset. It should have been disclosed in the estate administration. I am going to write to Gerald's attorney and inform them that a promissory note for $225,000 has been discovered as an estate asset and should be included in the estate accounting." She said, "Gerald will not be pleased." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Mom, Harold kept these records for 40 years because he believed that accurate documentation was a form of respect for the things you cared about. The least I can do is make sure his records mean what he intended them to mean." I retained an attorney, a woman named Patricia Vance, who specializes in estate litigation and who had been recommended to me through a colleague. Patricia reviewed everything Harold had left: the file boxes, the safe contents, the letter, the property deed, the brokerage account documentation, and the promissory note. She confirmed that the note was a legitimate estate asset that should have been disclosed in the estate accounting and had not been, which represented a significant omission in Gerald's administration of the estate. She confirmed that the property transfer and the brokerage account designation were both legally valid and properly structured, specifically as Harold had intended, outside the estate and therefore not subject to Gerald's administration. She confirmed that I had both the right and, in her professional assessment, the responsibility as a co-beneficiary of the estate alongside my mother to require that the note be included in the estate accounting and addressed as part of the estate distribution. Gerald's response to Patricia's letter arrived 6 weeks later, through his own attorney, in the form of a formal response to the disclosure that was notable primarily for what it did not contain, which was any acknowledgement that the note's omission from the estate accounting was an error or an oversight. The response characterized the note as a document Harold had not intended to include as a formal estate asset, which was a characterization that Harold's own letter, which we shared with Patricia but chose not to share with Gerald's attorney at that stage, directly contradicted. The response suggested that the family discussed the matter informally rather than through legal channels. Patricia and I, after consultation with my mother, declined the informal discussion and proceeded through legal channels. The probate court ordered the note included in the estate accounting. Gerald's attorney negotiated across 4 months of proceedings, a resolution in which Gerald agreed to formally acknowledge the note as an estate liability, meaning a debt he owed to the estate, and to satisfy it through the transfer of a property he owned, a commercial investment property in suburban Columbus, appraised at $260,000 to the estate as satisfaction of the $225,000 note, with the excess serving as partial settlement of the legal costs the estate had incurred through the proceedings. My mother and I, as the estate's beneficiaries, each received our share of the estate assets as ultimately distributed, including the proceeds of the property transfer Gerald had made to satisfy the note, which were divided equally between us per the terms of Harold's formal will. The property Harold had transferred to the trust in 2011 is mine. It is a small commercial building in a Columbus suburb, currently leased to 2 small businesses, generating a modest but consistent rental income. I have visited it twice since learning of its existence, the second time with a property manager I retained to handle the ongoing management of the lease. And I have stood outside it on both occasions thinking about Harold deciding, in 2011, without telling me, to put my name on a building, because he had decided I was the right person to have it, and thinking about the specific quality of trust that decision represented. The trust of a man who could not always find the harder conversations, but who found, in the careful documentation of his intentions across 16 years of a storage unit's worth of evidence, a way to say what he needed to say. The brokerage account has been transferred into my name. $348,000, built across decades of Harold's careful investing, now sitting in an account that is mine, that I did not know existed until 8 months ago, that Harold chose to leave to me specifically, outside the estate and outside Gerald's administration, because he trusted me to handle what he had built with the same careful attention he had given to building it. I want to talk to you directly now. Harold left me an elaborate document trail through a storage unit in Columbus because he was better at documentation than at direct conversation. And he knew it, and he did what he could within that limitation. He built a record that could speak for him when he was no longer present to speak for himself, and he put it somewhere that the right person would find it. And he trusted, correctly, that the right person would know what to do with it. I am telling you this story not as a story about uncovering wrongdoing, though wrongdoing was uncovered. I am telling it as a story about what it means to be trusted with something that requires both clarity and care, the specific combination Harold believed I had and that I have spent the months since trying to deserve as completely as he believed I did. If you have things that need to be documented, document them. If you have records that tell a story the people you love deserve to know, find a way to tell it, ideally directly, while you are alive to answer the questions that the records will raise. Harold was right that I could look at the numbers clearly. He was also right that I would rather have had the conversation with him while he was alive than have it. The storage unit was enough. It was not the same. That is today's story on the Family Ledger. Leave a comment wherever you are watching from. Tell me what time it is and whether there is a record somewhere in your life that tells a story nobody has looked at closely enough yet. I read every single one. Subscribe to the next story every week. Check the description for another one I think you will connect with. Thank you for being here.